My brother's cold betrayal proved blood carries the deepest poison. I rose from my company's ashes, meticulously burning his world to the ground. They say blood is thicker than water. It's one of those old truths everyone just seems to accept. It's supposed to mean that family bonds are the strongest, the most reliable, the most unbreakable connections you'll ever have. But I'm here to tell you that that's only half the story. What they don't tell you is that blood can also carry the deepest poison, a venom that works so slowly, so silently you don't even know you're dying until it's far too late. My brother Alexander taught me that lesson. He taught it to me with a pen, a piece of paper, and a betrayal so cold it could freeze the sun. But this isn't a story about how he destroyed me. This is the story of how I rose from the ashes he left behind and burned his entire world to the ground. To understand how it ended, you have to go back to the beginning. 9 years ago, I was 25 years old and I had that specific kind of fire that only comes from being young, broke, and absolutely certain you're on the verge of changing the world. I had an idea. It was more than an idea. It was a blueprint in my mind, a complex system I knew could revolutionize my industry. I called it Jones Innovations. The name was a bit on the nose, I'll admit, but it was mine. Every line of code, every business proposal, every single pixel of the logo, it all came from me. Those first couple of years were a blur of cheap coffee and instant ramen. My office was a tiny rented room with a window that looked out onto a brick wall. I practically lived there. I'd code until 3 in the morning, sleep on a lumpy couch for a few hours, and be back at my desk before the sun came up. I was the founder, the lead developer, the salesman, and the janitor. I didn't just build the company. I was the company. I poured my entire being into it, sacrificing friendships, relationships, and sleep, all for this singular vision. And then there was my brother, Alexander. He was 3 years older than me, 28 at the time. And to put it kindly, he was drifting. He'd bounced from job to job, never quite finding his place, always full of grand ideas, but short on the discipline to see them through. He had the charm, the easy smile, but lacked the grit. I loved him, though. He was my big brother, the guy who taught me how to throw a baseball and who stood up for me when I got picked on in middle school. Seeing him so lost, it hurt. So I did what any younger brother who was finally finding his footing would do. I offered him a hand up. I brought him into Jones Innovations. It wasn't a pity job. I gave him a real role, a mid-level operational position. He was in charge of logistics, scheduling, vendor management, all the crucial nuts and bolts that keep the engine of a company running. He was good at it too. He could smooth talk a supplier into giving us a discount or rearrange a shipping schedule on a moment's notice. He kept the trains running on time while I was busy laying down the track to new destinations. It felt perfect. The two Jones brothers building an empire together. Or so I thought. The company grew faster than I ever could have imagined. My technology worked, and my approach to clients was different. I didn't see them as accounts or revenue streams. I saw them as partners. I'd fly across the country for a 1-hour meeting if it meant I could look them in the eye. I'd stay on the phone with their technical teams all night to solve a problem. My personal guarantee was the company's guarantee. That's what built our reputation. The loyalty our clients had wasn't to the Jones Innovations letterhead, it was to James Jones. They trusted me, and that trust was the foundation of everything. 4 years went by in a flash. We were no longer a scrappy startup. We were a legitimate, respected player in the industry. We had a real office with real windows. We had a team of brilliant employees. I was 29 years old and on top of the world. But I wasn't satisfied. I saw the next horizon, the next big leap. It was time for a major expansion, a high-risk, high-reward move that would either elevate us to the next level or sink us completely. It involved securing massive loans, opening international offices, and navigating a minefield of new regulations. The weight of the entire operation rested squarely on my shoulders. It was during this time that my lawyer sat me down. He was a cautious older man who had seen it all. He told me, "James, you are the key man. Everything, the bank loans, the client, contracts, the intellectual property, it's all tied to you. If God forbid something were to happen to you, if you were in an accident and couldn't make decisions, the company would be paralyzed. The banks would call in their loans, clients would panic, and everything you built would crumble within weeks." He suggested a safeguard, a simple legal instrument called a durable power of attorney. It was a document appointing someone to step into my shoes to make critical decisions for me, but with one crucial condition: only if I was medically incapacitated and unable to do it myself. It was a standard procedure for a CEO in my position. A responsible, mature precaution, a safety net. The question, of course, was who to name. Who did I trust enough to hand over the keys to my entire kingdom? Who would protect my life's work with the same ferocity that I would? For me, the answer was instantaneous. It was obvious. There was only one person on the planet I would entrust with that kind of power. My brother, Alexander. I remember talking to him about it in my office one evening. The city lights were twinkling outside my window, a view I had earned through sheer force of will. I explained the situation, the lawyer's advice, the necessity of it all. I told him, Alex, if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, you're the only one who can keep this ship from sinking. You know the operations inside and out. You know the people. You're the only one I trust. He got this serious look on his face, a look of profound gravity. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Don't even talk like that, little brother. Nothing's going to happen to you, but you know I'd do anything for you." Of course. I've got your back. Always. A week later, we were sitting in my lawyer's sterile, mahogany-paneled conference room. The air smelled of old books and money. The document was laid out on the table between us. It was just a few pages of dense legal text, but it felt as heavy as a tombstone. I read through it, my lawyer explaining the clauses. It gave my agent Alexander sweeping powers over my finances, my business, my entire life, contingent only on my incapacitation. I picked up the heavy, expensive-looking pen. I looked across the table at Alexander. He was my brother, the same kid I'd built forts in the living room with, the same guy who'd been my best man at a wedding that didn't last. He was family. He was blood. In that moment, trusting him felt as natural as breathing. I signed my name on the line. My signature, the same one that had launched a company, now signed away ultimate control over it. Then it was his turn. He took the pen from me and with a casual flick of his wrist scribbled his own name. He slid the paper back to the lawyer and gave me a little smirk. He even made a joke. "Don't worry," he said with a chuckle. "If you go into a coma, I promise not to sell all your fancy cars and replace the office coffee with decaf." We both laughed. It was a moment of levity, a way to dispel the morbid tension in the room. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The safety net was in place. I had done the responsible thing. I had protected my company, my employees, and my legacy. I had placed the fate of my world into the hands of the one person I believed would guard it as if it were his own. That signature, that joke, that feeling of absolute unshakable trust, it was the single biggest mistake of my life. I had just handed my own executioner the axe, and I had done it with a smile on my face. I had no idea that the bus we joked about was already barreling down the road and that my brother wasn't standing by to save me. He was waiting in the driver's seat. 1 year. That's how long it was between me signing that document and the universe deciding to call my bluff. For 1 year, that power of attorney sat in a file cabinet, a forgotten piece of paper, a relic of a morbid but necessary conversation. For 1 year, I went about my life building my company, closing deals, living the life I had carved out for myself. I was 30 years old and I felt invincible. I had a thriving business, a brother I trusted implicitly, and a safety net that I was sure I'd never need. Invincibility is a funny thing. It's a suit of armor made of glass. You don't know how fragile it is until something hits it. For me, that something was a 4,000-pound sedan that ran a red light on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I don't remember the impact. I wish I did. Sometimes I think if I could just recall that final violent moment, it would make more sense. But all I have are fragments like broken shards of a mirror. The squeal of tires that sounded like a dying animal. The sudden blinding glare of headlights through a rain-streaked windshield. A horn blaring not in a long sustained blast but in a desperate stuttering panic. And the last thing I remember, the very last sensory input my brain recorded before it shut down, was the sound. A deafening, percussive crunch of metal folding in on itself. A symphony of shattering glass and screeching steel. Then nothing. The world didn't go black. It didn't fade away. It just stopped. One frame, I was there, my hand on the steering wheel, my mind on a quarterly report. The next frame never came. For me, time simply ceased to exist. I was unplugged from the universe. Doctors would later call it a coma, a deep, unresponsive state caused by severe traumatic brain injury. But to me, it was just silence, a long, dreamless abyss. While I was floating in that void, the world outside kept spinning. The first person to get the call, the first person to rush to the hospital was my brother, Alexander. I've seen the reports and heard the stories from nurses who were there. He was by all accounts the image of a devoted, grief-stricken brother. He was 33 at the time, and he paced the sterile hallways of the ICU, his face a mask of worry. He conferred with doctors. He made the difficult calls to distant family members. He sat by my bedside for hours watching the rhythmic rise and fall of my chest, a movement dictated not by my own will, but by a machine that was breathing for me. He was my emergency contact, my next of kin, and thanks to that document I had so confidently signed a year earlier, he was now my legal agent. He held my life in his hands both medically and financially. The power of attorney, that dormant legal instrument, had been activated. The safety net was deployed. For the first few weeks, he did exactly what I would have expected, what any loving brother would do. He made sure my medical bills were being handled. He reassured our employees, telling them that Jones Innovations was stable, that I was a fighter, and that we would all get through this together. He stepped into my office not as a replacement, but as a caretaker, a temporary steward holding the line until the rightful king returned to his throne. He used the POA for the first time to authorize a payroll run, a completely necessary and responsible action. He used it again to pay the rent on my apartment. Again, the right thing to do. He was just keeping my ship from sinking, just like I'd asked. But a strange thing happens when a man who has always lived in a shadow is suddenly thrust into the sun. At first, the light is blinding, but then his eyes adjust, and he starts to like the warmth. Alexander, who had always been my mid-level operations guy, was now the one sitting in the CEO's chair. My chair. He was the one leading the board meetings. He was the one the senior partners came to for decisions. For the first time in his life, he wasn't James's older brother. He was Mr. Jones. I can only imagine what that felt like for him. The taste of that power after years of feeling like second best. He started making small changes, nothing major at first. He tweaked a logistics protocol here, renegotiated a minor vendor contract there. He was putting his own stamp on things. He was trying my life on for size, and he was discovering that it fit him rather well. The doctors, meanwhile, were not optimistic. "We need to be realistic," they would tell him in hushed tones in the hospital corridors. "The chances of a full recovery are slim. He may never wake up. And if he does, he might not be the same person." Each one of those pessimistic prognoses must have been like a key unlocking another door in his mind. The idea that my absence might not be temporary but permanent began to take root. And with it, a darker, more ambitious thought began to grow. Why should he be a temporary steward? Why should he just be a caretaker for a kingdom that might never see its king again? He was the one doing the work. He was the one making the decisions. Didn't he deserve it? The shift was subtle. He started referring to Jones Innovations not as my company, but as our company. Then eventually it became his company. The employees noticed. The man who had once been a familiar, if unremarkable, part of the management team was now carrying himself with an air of ownership. He was no longer just keeping the ship afloat. He was charting a new course. 6 months. That's how long it took for the transformation to complete. 6 months of me lying motionless in a hospital bed, oblivious. 6 months of him sitting in my leather chair, looking out at my city, convincing himself that it was his destiny. The betrayal, when it came, wasn't a crime of passion. It wasn't a smash-and-grab robbery. It was a cold, calculated legal execution, and the weapon he used was the very shield I had given him. He didn't need to hack my bank accounts or forge my signature. He didn't have to. I had already given him my signature pre-approved on that power of attorney. He had the legal authority to act as me in all business matters. So one Tuesday afternoon, 6 months to the day after my accident, Alexander convened a special meeting of the board. Except he was the only one in the room. As the man with my power of attorney, he held all of my voting power. He was the majority shareholder, the CEO, and the chairman all rolled into one. He was, for all legal intents and purposes, me. He presented a motion to the empty boardroom, a proposal to issue a new class of shares, a massive number of them so large it would make the existing shares, my shares, the ones I had bled and sweat for 9 years, to build, almost worthless. The motion was to issue these new shares to a single recipient in recognition of his invaluable leadership during a time of crisis. The recipient, of course, was Alexander Jones. He called for a vote, and then, acting as me, he voted aye. With a stroke of a pen on a stock issuance certificate, it was done. He didn't steal my company. He legally diluted my ownership into oblivion. He seized control not with a crowbar, but with a corporate bylaw. In an instant, I went from being the founder and owner of Jones Innovations to a minority shareholder with a meaningless fractional stake. I was locked out. The company I had built from nothing was now in the eyes of the law his, completely and irrevocably his. He then used the same authority to access my personal accounts. He didn't drain them, not all at once. He was smarter than that. He just changed the ownership, transferring the assets to new accounts under his sole control, citing the need to manage my ongoing medical expenses and protect my estate. It was all perfectly legal, all perfectly sanctioned by the document I had signed. I was a ghost in my own life, a silent, unconscious spectator to my own ruin. While machines kept my heart beating, my own brother was methodically and efficiently cutting me out of the world I had built. He took my office, he took my money, and he took my company. He stripped me of everything, all while maintaining the public facade of the devoted, worried brother, dutifully managing his incapacitated siblings' affairs. He must have felt so clever, so powerful. He had won using the law as his weapon and covering his tracks perfectly. He was safe, he was secure, he was the new king. What he didn't count on, what he could never have possibly imagined, was that deep inside that silent prison, a prisoner was beginning to stir, and he was listening. Waking up wasn't like in the movies. There was no sudden gasp for air, no dramatic flutter of eyelids. It was more like surfacing from the deepest part of the ocean, slow and agonizing. The first thing I remember is a dull, persistent beeping. The second was a profound weakness, a feeling like my bones were made of chalk and my muscles had evaporated. For 2 years, my body had been a cage, and now the door was open, but I had forgotten how to walk. I was 32 years old. Alexander was there, of course. He played the part of the overjoyed, relieved brother to perfection. Tears in his eyes, a hand on my shoulder, his voice thick with emotion. "Jimmy, you're back. You're finally back. I was so worried." "But don't you worry about a thing," he said, squeezing my hand. "I've been taking care of everything." And for a few foggy days, I believed him. I wanted to believe him, but as the fog cleared, the questions started. Simple things at first. I wanted to see my apartment. "It's being taken care of," he'd say. I asked about my personal savings. "Managed and secure for your medical bills," he assured me. Then I asked about the company. I asked for the latest quarterly reports. A flicker of something I couldn't place crossed his face. He sat down at my bedside, his expression a carefully constructed mask of solemn responsibility. He told me a story of a company on the brink of collapse after its leader's tragic accident. A story of a brave, selfless brother stepping into the void, making the tough decisions to keep the dream alive. He pulled a file from his briefcase. "I had to restructure, Jimmy," he said, his voice soft, "to protect the company, to protect your legacy." He walked me through the paperwork page by page. He showed me the board resolution where he, using the power of attorney I'd given him, voted to issue a controlling majority of new shares to himself. He showed me the new corporate structure with his name listed as chairman and CEO. He showed me the documents he used to transfer my personal assets into accounts under his sole control, all under the guise of estate management. He didn't present it as a theft. He presented it as a rescue. He truly believed he was the hero of the story. He looked me in the eye, the man who shared my blood, and explained how he had saved my company by taking it from me. He expected me to thank him. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even raise my voice. A cold, terrifying calm washed over me. In that moment, the brother I had loved was gone, and in his place sat a stranger wearing his face. I saw the whole thing, a perfect, crystalline image of his betrayal. And I knew with absolute certainty that a legal battle was pointless. He had used the law to build his fortress. He'd left me with nothing to fight him with. So I wouldn't fight him in a courtroom. I would fight him in the marketplace. I would fight him on the terrain I knew best. I just nodded. I looked at him, my eyes probably still glassy from the medication, and I said, "Thank you, Alexander. Thank you for taking care of everything." He smiled, relieved. He thought my mind was still weak. He thought I was broken. He had no idea that the fire had just been lit. The next 6 months were hell. Physical therapy is a polite term for systematic torture. My first attempt to stand felt like my legs were being ripped apart. Every single day was a battle against my own atrophied body. The therapist would push me to my limits, and then I would push myself further. They saw a man desperate to walk again. They didn't see what was really driving me. Every painful step on the treadmill was a step towards his ruin. Every weight I lifted was another brick in the foundation of my revenge. While my body was screaming, my mind was silent, focused in designing a war. I spent my nights not sleeping, but planning. I made quiet calls to a few loyal former employees who had been pushed out by Alexander. They told me everything: how he'd cut research and development to the bone, how he'd replaced our top-tier materials with cheaper alternatives, how he'd squeezed our oldest clients with new fees and terrible customer service. He was harvesting the company, not growing it. He was draining the goodwill I had spent 9 years building. The clients were unhappy, they were trapped, and I was going to be their escape. Then I made the most important call of my life. 5 years ago, during a period of high-risk expansion, I'd set up a failsafe. It was an offshore investment fund co-owned with a silent partner who had invested in me personally, not just in Jones Innovations. The plan was to one day launch a version 2.0 inches of my business model, leaner, faster, more advanced. The coma had put that plan on ice. My recovery thawed it out. I got my partner on a secure line. I told him everything. He was silent for a long time. Then he said, "The money was for you, James, not for him. Tell me what you need." 6 months later, I walked out of that rehabilitation clinic. I was leaner, harder, and more focused than I had ever been in my life. I was 32 and a half years old and officially back from the dead. 2 weeks later, I incorporated my new company. I called it Phoenix Strategic. It was time to rise from the ashes. I didn't issue a press release. I didn't take out ads. My strategy was surgical. I made a list of every single client Alexander had, my old clients, my friends. I started with the biggest, the one whose contract had been the bedrock of Jones Innovations. Alexander, then 35 and a half, probably had a great morning that day. He probably sat in my old office drinking my old brand of coffee, feeling like the king of the world. Then his assistant buzzed him, an urgent email from our largest client. He opened it. It was a contract termination notice, effective immediately. He would have been stunned, annoyed. He would have gotten on the phone demanding an explanation. The client would have been polite but firm. "We're sorry, Alexander, but we've been offered a superior service at a better price point. We've decided to move our business." "To who?" Alexander would have demanded. "Who could possibly offer you a better deal?" "A new firm," the client would reply. "They're called Phoenix Strategic." I can picture him perfectly. Hanging up the phone, a knot of irritation in his stomach. He'd open his web browser, typing the name in with angry stabs of his fingers. Phoenix Strategic. The homepage would load. Clean, professional, aggressive. And then he would see it. Front and center on the About Us page. A new professional headshot of me. Healthy. Smiling a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. And beneath it, the title James Jones, founder and CEO. The blood would have drained from his face. The coffee cup would have slipped from his hand. In that instant, the ghost he thought he'd buried had just walked through the front door of his castle. I wasn't a broken invalid anymore. I was his competition, and the war had just begun. For the next 18 months, I executed my plan with relentless, methodical precision. I didn't just want to win. I wanted to dismantle him, piece by piece, using the very clients he had taken for granted. I met with every single one of them. I didn't need to sling mud. I didn't have to mention betrayal or theft. I just laid out the facts. I showed them the data on how service quality at Jones Innovations had declined under his leadership. I presented them with the Phoenix Strategic Model, my version 2.0 inches, which offered them a demonstrably superior product, better support, and as the final nail in the coffin at a more competitive price. I reminded them of the relationship we had built, the trust they had placed in me personally. The decision for them was purely business. And it was an easy one. One by one, the pillars of his stolen empire crumbled. Every week, another contract termination notice landed on his desk. He tried to fight back. He dropped his prices, but he couldn't match my efficiency. He made promises, but his reputation for poor service was already sealed. He tried to badmouth me, claiming I was unstable after my accident, but the clients knew me. They knew who had built the original relationships. They knew who they could trust. He was in a death spiral. The revenue dried up. He had to lay off the staff I had hired. He had to sell the equipment I had bought. The company I had built from scratch was being hollowed out, not by me, but by the consequences of his own greed and incompetence. I was simply the catalyst. And then today, the final victory. I'm 34 years old. The news broke this morning. Jones Innovations, unable to service its debts, has officially filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. It won't be restructured. It will be liquidated. Its assets sold off for pennies on the dollar. The name, the brand, everything he stole from me is now officially worthless. It's nothing more than a bad memory. My brother Alexander is 37. He is unemployed. His reputation in our industry is completely destroyed. He is financially and I suspect spiritually bankrupt. He flew too close to the sun and he was burned so badly he'll never fly again. I'm sitting in my office now, the CEO of Phoenix Strategic. It's bigger, more profitable, and more respected than Jones Innovations ever was. I look out the window at the city, the same view he once stole from me. I didn't have to break a single law. I didn't have to resort to his level of deceit. I just built a better company. I outcompeted him, I outmaneuvered him, and I erased him from the industry. He used a piece of paper to take my life's work. I used his own incompetence and my own resilience to take it all back, and then some. The revenge is complete, and it is absolute.